What really works when it comes to de-escalating anxious, hostile, or challenging behavior? Our free guide, CPI's Top 10 De-Escalation Tips, is filled with effective strategies to help you stay calm and manage your own response so you can handle challenging questions, set limits, and diffuse challenging behaviors before they escalate. To get the guide, enter cpisite.com/EP51 in your browser. That's CPISITE.com/EP51, and we'll send you the guide for your trouble. If you're listening on YouTube, just click the free resource link below.
Welcome to Unrestrained, the podcast series from CPI. Here you can enjoy conversations where professionals on all sides of crisis and behavior management relax and open up about themselves, their workplace, and their clients. You'll get the latest tips and trends from the best in the business, so tune in often to integrate their experiences with your own. Hello and welcome to Unrestrained, the CPI podcast series. This is your host, Terry Vittone, and today I'm joined by Mr. Randy Frost. Hello and welcome, Randy.
Good morning.
Good morning. Let me tell you a little bit about our guest. For the past 38 years, Randy Frost has been a social worker, behavioral specialist, mental health counselor, and crisis intervention trainer in hospitals, schools, treatment centers, and juvenile justice facilities. He has expertise in crisis prevention and intervention training, team building, leadership training, therapeutic camps, adventure-based counseling programs in schools and community-based settings, parenting workshops, life skills training, and boot camps. Randy has degrees in social work and nursing with certifications in experimental therapy and youth development. Today, Randy is the program director at the Paul Anderson Youth Home, a juvenile justice facility in Vidalia, Georgia, for young men aged 16 to 21. Many of the residents are there through court order, and behavioral issues are a day-to-day concern. Our interview today will focus on Randy's broad expertise utilizing crisis prevention training and techniques for effective behavior management. Okay, Randy, let's begin today by talking about your career history in psychiatric settings. Give us an overview of that, and then talk about at what point in your career that you became aware of de-escalation techniques, such as those found in CPI's nonviolent crisis intervention training.
Okay, that was quite an opening. I appreciate that.
All right, you're welcome.
Well, back in 1980, actually, is where my career began, and that was at the Topeka State Hospital in Topeka, Kansas. And I was an individual who really walked off the streets with no background, no training, no education into the mental health field, and it was really interesting because at a young age I had worked at many jobs and really hadn't found what I was looking for. And day one, I walked into a pre-adolescent center and exposed to, these younger children that have all kind of issues. And that was, again, back in 1980. And I feel exactly today like I did back then. The overall feeling I had is like I found where I was supposed to be, and I still feel that particular way. But as you said, I've been exposed to a lot of different areas, and certainly through those areas, there's been a great deal of acting out behaviors. We all know verbal and certainly physical. And in the beginning, with lack of training, it was kind of survival skills on what you did, and learning as you go, kind of learning on the job. And some days that was tough, and some days that was rough, but we managed to get through it. And fortunately, toward the late 80s and 90s is when a lot of organizations began to kind of look at alternatives. What can we do besides hands-on restraint? What can we do besides medicating these people and making them walk around like zombies so they'll be cool, calm, and collect? And with that being said, I remember part of that was with me. I'm a pretty good-sized guy. I mean, 6'4", about 230, 235, and when there is physical acting out, I always got to be one of those people that got to be in the midst of it.
I expect so.
And as exciting and seriously as exciting and adrenaline flowing as that was, certainly over a period of time, your safety become a concern, to other people's safety as well as the patient and the clients. And it was like, okay, we gotta learn to do something a little bit different. And that's when different places began to kind of look at, possible diffusing. And really, I think back then it was a lot of how to appropriately put hands on somebody rather than some of the techniques we certainly use right now. So it was definitely a learning experience. I continue to learn today and hope to tomorrow in this field, because I'm a person now, not just because of age and certainly sports injuries, but I certainly get much more satisfaction now being able to diffuse and talk somebody down rather than have to put my hands on them and end up on the floor with them.
So you found then through your career trajectory that things like physical and chemical restraints were more prevalent when you began, and then you started to see verbal de-escalation come in as your career progressed.
When you think about a state hospital institution, I'm not bad-mouthing anybody, but even back then when I was licensed to give medication, and it was pretty much just heavy doses of Thorazine, and the patients, what they had to look forward to was cigarette breaks and food. I mean, there was not necessarily a great deal of therapeutic value, but it was really the medicine to keep them in control. And, you certainly can't do that with anybody and everybody. I'm kind of an anti-medicine person. I know that sometimes if you need it, you've got to have it. But I certainly, even in my counseling roles over the years, medication doesn't necessarily deal with what's going on in the head and the heart, and that's where you have to try alternative choices.
So what was the first de-escalation training that you experienced?
Oh, wow. Pretty much they were kind of non-formal. I think in a lot of places it was some of the senior staff. They would kind of go over things that would work and do this and kind of don't do that. And really it was in the 90s before I actually began to go to any formal training. And at that particular time, the hospital I worked at in Topeka, Kansas, it was one of the 90 charter hospitals. And we use MAB, which is Management of Aggressive Behavior. And then a couple of years later, they kind of added to that, and then we kind of went into PMAB, which was Prevention and Management of Aggressive Behavior, which is now they're kind of out of business. And but that's what I was introduced to, and that's where some of my knowledge and experience, I give them a great deal of credit, because that's when things really, over a period of time, began to change.
I see. And when do you remember when you were first certified in CPI's Nonviolent Crisis Intervention Training?
Oh, CPI probably I'm guessing 6-7 years ago.
Okay. All right. Because I think I have you. I can edit this out a little bit, but I looked at our record, and I think I have you first back on 6/15 in 2007 was your first certification. So it's been...
Well, you know what? Actually, you're right, because looking back on that now, I did, and then I let that lapse because for 20 years I kind of worked for myself, and I did a lot of this other work in a lot of the places, but I normally worked for myself at that particular time. Schedule-wise, and I don't think I actually, I knew I had what I needed to, so I let that lapse before I came back. So no, that'd be pretty close. Very good. Yeah. All
right. And now I'm going to ask you, Randy, about your work as the program director, where you are now at the Paul Anderson Youth Home. Could you first give us a basic overview of the facility and the program?
Absolutely. I've been coming here probably for 3, 4, 5 years and doing a lot of the staff trainings, was certainly included PMAB, and then we did go to CPI because I kind of liked the concept, what we were doing there. And then about 16 months ago, they were able to convince me to come in. And during my 16 months here, I've had several different titles, and titles to me are not that important, from program director to program advisor. But what I was coming up was doing trainings, and once a month I would actually work as a consultant. And right now, my actual title, if it needs to be, is the staff trainer, as well as CPI trainer, and then transition coordinator. But without all those things, it pretty much everybody here wears a lot of hats. We are a 53-acre campus in Vidalia, Georgia. Mm-hmm. We are a nonprofit ministry. Our young men, I like to say, they walk in as a troubled boy, and we take 16 years old to 21. Now, we've kind of changed that. We've actually taken a couple 15-year-olds that we thought were mature enough. But again, you're talking about these are troubled boys, and whether they have a mental health diagnosis, which most of those don't. When you look at today's society, when we talk about trouble, that can be between alcohol and drugs. certainly substance abuse. It can be many forms of addiction. It can be verbal acting out. It can be certainly physically acting out. It can be, I'd say about 7 or 8 of our young men right now are involved in the juvenile system. And they are court ordered to be here, but the rest are here because parents have seen our website or heard things about us and are kind of at their last resort. But we are, like I said, they walk in as a trouble boy, and I like to think they walk out of here as a young man of character. We are a nonprofit. We do not accept insurance. We currently have 16 boys. Our capacity is 20.
I see. And I understand from our pre-interview, Randy, that at Paul Anderson, you haven't had to go hands-on with a physical restraint with boys exhibiting acting out behavior, and that you attribute your success to CPI's approach to managing.
Well, you know what? It's really, really interesting. I'm really proud to say that. And the cool part is, it's not these, like I said, it's not that these boys do not act out, because you think of a young boy, a young man of 16 to 21 years old, especially one who fits under the category of what we call troubled. They're not necessarily choir boys. There's a reason that each one of those is here.
Right on.
And what I really attribute is part of me coming here as a consultant was convincing the staff and the people here that we can't necessarily deal with and treat a young man of that age as they did 10, 15, 20 years ago. We had to make considerable changes, and we have made considerable changes, continue to, which I think is incredible. But one of those things too was changing the concept. Here, you're not going to have a young boy that walk in, sit down to the classroom, read his book, and yes sir, no sir all day. And you can demand that, you can expect that, but in reality, it's not going to happen. And we are very consistent. We're very structured. We have positive consequences. We have negative consequences. And to me, how the day goes determines who's here. And the biggest thing I like about what we do here is we go through an incredible screening process, not only for the boys to be admitted, but certainly for the staff. And you have to be compassionate. You have to care. You have to have Lord in your life, and you be willing to learn that if somebody gets in your face and takes a pop at you, you can't sling back at them. That doesn't mean you need to stand there. So a lot of the concept has certainly changed in how we do things. I think not only CPI, the concept that we've been teaching and training here, has added to that, but along with the screening, along with hiring the right people, believing in that and believing to try to talk to somebody, diffuse, and establish that relationship. I like to think I have an incredible relationship with every one of the boys here, and they're very respectful to me. If I ask them, tell them to do something, they're going to do it whether they want to or not. And again, I think a lot of that is respect. A lot of that is the concept that, especially be able to recognize behaviors, being able to diffuse, being able to communicate with somebody, to that kind of thing. Now, ironically, I knew this was going to happen because when we spoke the other day, on Thursday afternoon, I had 2 of the fellows get into a little heated discussion, and I actually had to physically grab one and pull him away. So I kind of broke my record, but here again, I want to use this. Now, the young man that I pulled away is probably about 6'4", about 260. And he's used to being a bully. He's used to physically acting out, punching holes in the wall. And even though I was verbally de-escalating him, I could see in his body language that he definitely had intended to use aggressive behavior towards a smaller, younger person. At that point, I basically went into him and kind of put my arms wrapped in a great big therapeutic hold, and I was able to walk him down the stairs. My hold probably lasted 3 or 4 minutes, and I had another staff member take him. So we were laughing about it later. I told him he broke my record, but it was still recognized. The situation was past being able to verbally de-escalate. It was time for me to do what I needed to do, and once I had him where I wanted him to go, the hands were off, and there was no further problem with that. So it was a 5-6 second physical hold, but again, in 16 months, I'll take that one time over that.
Right. Really,
but again, I think it's a perfect example. I really do.
The classic utilization of CPI's crisis development model in determining the appropriate response to the behavior.
Exactly.
And was CPI in place when you arrived at Paul Anderson, or did you bring it in?
No, actually, as I said, we began when they started doing crisis training for the first 2 years. I actually implemented. First couple of years, we utilized PMAB, and again, the reason I went away from that was because they kind of went away, and PMAB was really kind of notorious about not changing, not staying modern, not staying updated, which is another factor I love about CPI, because they continue every day to look to improve and to modernize and to just keep moving in the right direction. And there's not a lot of, I'm a trainer in a couple other crisis intervention trainings, and I've kind of let them lapse because they kind of stay stagnant, and some of the stuff I get, some of the stuff you never really change, but that has been a positive for me about CPI because we are always moving forward.
I see. You've had experience working then with several different crisis prevention programs, and you've indicated you find CPI training very effective in producing the outcomes that you like. And I guess you have just kind of compared and contrasted the program you'd work with. Would you like to add anything to that about differentiating CPI from other de-escalation training that you've experienced?
Well, and part of that, like in a couple weeks, I'm actually going to Tampa and Fort Myers as a contractor, and what they're wanting me to do there, it's interesting. I can't wait to get there because I'm going to be training 4 days, probably 200, 250 people. Now, what they tell me is, we're good. We have all this verbal de-escalation. We got that. We got it. But then as they continued to contract with me, they said, but we're having a great deal more physical acting out. So I mentioned to them, I'm curious because if you have all this great verbal, and they're not a facility that is known of history of having physical, aggressive behavior on a consistent basis. So my question to them is, somewhere there's something missing, because if we have the verbal de-escalation skills, we shouldn't be having an increase in physical acting out, especially if that's not part of our history. So what I will do in there, I will see what they've got, and really what they're wanting me to do is, it's not CPI. They're basically simply wanting me to come down and teach them how to legally, appropriately put hands on individuals when you have to do nonviolent physical intervention. So it's going to be really interesting because, as I get there, I don't know where they had the verbal de-escalation, what they had, but I'm going to really look into that, because if you really stop and think about it, if we are that good at that, then we shouldn't have increased physical acting out. So my first purpose is to go down and teach and train how to keep yourself safe, how to keep the patient safe. But on that part, too, is really to look and see where they're at and what I can recommend them in the future.
So they might build, that may be a bridge to CPI training for this group then, once they become.
And that means, that's certainly something I will look into after my 4 days there, when I actually sit down with administration and kind of do an overview. But it's just really, like I said, the modernize. I just recently went back to Jacksonville, Florida for another 4-day training, and even though a lot of, to me, a lot of the stuff continues. I mean, I know what works for me in a situation, and that's just, that's confidence. That's not trying to be cocky. I know for the most part what needs, what my role is and what I need to do and whenever. And a lot of that, I've taken things from trainings with Secure, with Handle with Care. I still carry things with from PMAB, but I think the biggest thing with CPI that has really impacted me and a lot of the people I work with is just really the, if I'm doing a training, I go into something, I'll get on the blackboard or erase board or whatever, and I will put down, if you have people identify acting out behaviors, all right, people will give you, there's all kind of ways we act out. And then if you act out, and this is something that I didn't learn through CPI, through the book, but I really did. Okay, identify the acting out behavior. Now, the second thing is, I promise you, there's negative feelings attached to that. So if somebody's hitting the wall, screaming, hollering, throwing things, whatever, crying, there's emotional negative feelings attached to that. So all of a sudden now, once you find out what's wrong with Johnny over here in the corner, what he's feeling, what he's thinking, we know there's something that triggered those feelings, that triggered the behavior. And it's a great theory, and that's the same theory I use a lot with CPI. There's a problem, identify what the problem is, what's causing it, what's triggering it, and and such a large percentage of the time when you use that and know how to use that, you're not putting hands on people. I mean, as much as, you have to, or people think you have to.
I see. Well, that's a good lesson to take from our training, for sure. And I like in an answer that you had written to me, or we talked about, you said, as a former PMAB, secure and handle with care crisis trainer, I do speak a lot about CPI as the best and everything else as the rest. And it sounds like you've really incorporated your own experience and understanding into the basic lessons that CPI training gives you.
Absolutely. We have, in mid-July, I have to retrain everybody here. And I'm excited about that because not only the new additions that have been added to CPI, but that whole concept about being in control and working with these boys, there's a reason that we eliminate. They're going to huff and puff, and they're going to blow your house down, or they're going to threaten to. That's okay, big deal. If that's the worst thing they do, it's okay. But our whole concept is built around the relationships and how to deal with them and how to set limits with them and how to stay a step ahead no matter what they're doing. And my trainings, I have an interview with a new staff member today, and I really, it's just the foundation. I really believe that CPI is the foundation of how to treat people and how to take care of them when no matter what comes up.
Excellent. You've had success. We talked in our pre-interview where you went into a psychiatric hospital in the South, that was a facility in a fair degree of peril because of the outcomes they were seeing, and you had a lot of success lowering restraints at the psychiatric hospital. Could you tell that story for us?
Wow. Yeah, I'm proud to tell that story. As a matter of fact, I am due to talk to them again tomorrow. But for, I have the exact dates, but for about a year and a half, I was contracted to go into this facility in Louisiana, and it was a short-term acute psychiatric facility. And the CEO there is somebody that I used to work with, and wherever she goes, she always incorporates and brings me in to do a lot of staff trainings. That's how much faith she has in me. But it was probably one of the most verbal, physical, acting out, and, I keep wanting to say violent. It was not uncommon. They were averaging sometimes large amounts of restraints, sometimes daily, sometimes 15, 16 a month. And I'm talking about full-blown physical restraints, hands-on to the floor, medication type thing. So very, very unsafe, very chaotic, very lack of programming. It was pretty much that same thing. Patients, sit down, shut up, do what you're supposed to do, and that'll get you out of here. And for anywhere from 8 to 15 days a month, I was going down there for a year and a half, and I was working all shifts because I wanted to see what was going on. And really what we used was CPI concept, but along with that concept, we decided there were approximately 23, 25 staff that we decided to let go because of their just negative influence. And a lot of times they were the ones that were causing a lot of the acting out behavior. So didn't believe in any type of crisis intervention. It was not uncommon for me to see a patient hit a staff and a staff member hit a patient back. If that tells you anything.
Well, it's a wrong kind of, it's an integrated experience that we wouldn't recommend.
No. So over that, not only terminating people that had no business being in a psych hospital, but hiring people, and part of the hiring was giving them additional trainings rather than coming in and getting hired, go to the floor, and you're expected to do your job. So the several things they've really done is increase their staff trainings and really increase the concept of CPI. Yes, they have to go through the CPI training, but they're doing monthly ongoing trainings in regard to all the different components, from diffusing to setting limits to, all the things that we do in a training, but offering those much more than just a once-a-year basis.
And they've seen it.
And with those changes and with programming now and taking the TV away and making it a true treatment center, it's amazing the changes that have taken place there. Where before, it was a place that if I had to send a friend or family member, there's no way I would have referred that place. At this point, I would actually refer that facility for someone in need of, some type of psychiatric treatment.
Well, that's a very dramatic turnaround when you would recommend somebody to go there after you saw such challenging conditions. We've talked about this in our pre-interview, and I'm anxious to get to it because I like the story aspect of it. But you have one behavioral episode that we talked about in particular that stands out as an example of how CPI training helped to prevent a violent outcome. Could you share that with us, Randy?
I will, because when you asked me that, the first one that came to my mind. As a matter of fact, I could tell that's where you were headed, and kind of pretty much this was before a lot of training and a lot of experience in the hospital. And I was radioed over along with two other staff members to come into a unit, and the charge nurse basically is pointing to us for over in the corner is a very large man standing with a broken table leg. He had busted a wooden table leg off a table. Now, for those who are knowledgeable and have any idea, the example I use, the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, if you remember the tall, gentle, giant Indian, this was a duplicate. This was a twin of that actor in that movie. So he's a giant of a man. He's standing in the corner with a table leg. Charge nurse looks at me and two other guys that I want you to go over and take that table leg from him, and we're going to basically give him some medication. And I looked at her, and she basically walked away, went to the nurse's station, turned, shut the door, and locked us out. And I'm looking at the other two guys. We're looking at each other saying, oh, my God, what do we do? We didn't have security. It was us three. So besides praying, really, to make a long story short, as we began to slowly move towards this guy, and I was the one who was trying to make eye contact and really watch my body language, and I was introducing myself and walking to him, but certainly in a non-threatening way. And at one point, before I even got really close, I just sat down. I sat down in a chair right by there and continued to try to talk to him. And you see in a short time the threatening stance he had. And the biggest thing, he thought we were a threat to him. He thought we were going to come hurt him and harm him and who knows what. So I could see his demeanor, his body language change, and he slowly began to interact with me, and certainly asked him for permission to even get closer. So little by little got closer to him, and he could kind of see me. And the thing was, as he said, he was just scared to death. He had had something bad happen to him before in a facility, and it wasn't very long before I'm close enough to him. Of course, those other two gentlemen are back behind me, and they're praying, but we didn't approach him like we were going to come in and tackle him. And before long, I asked him, and he puts the table leg down, and we're talking, and he just shared. He was scared to death. His anxiety level was high. He thought we were just going to come hurt him. And many times, that was such a teaching moment, learning moment for me, because so many times before, if we had the numbers, we just went in and got him. We got him, and we take him down and take that from him and, give him a couple of injections in the rear end, and wow, we won the battle. And I will never forget that moment.
So you basically modeled kinesics and paraverbals, and your tone and your posture totally kind of broke through this.
That's what it was all about.
Yeah, that's excellent. So from your really extensive experience with CPI training in psychiatric settings like the one you describe, and in Louisiana, you feel that CPI training has the power to change organizational culture and improve staff sense of confidence and safety?
I do. I think it's a huge component. I think it's part of that foundation. And again, you got to have, in any facility, we all know, you got to have the right people at the right place, and the ones who are willing to continue to learn. Like I said, I've done this for 38 years, and one of my goals every day is to get better. There's nobody that knows it all, but you've got to have certain things in that foundation, and I believe the CPI component is the culture, how you do what we do. I wouldn't want to be, no matter where I am. It's funny, too, because I look back on this now. Even when I began to learn crisis intervention, I used that. I used to bartend part-time, and part of my bartending was sometimes being that bouncer. And it's funny, it's not, CPI is just not something I incorporate when I walk through a facility. It's something I use a lot in my everyday life, and that says a lot right there.
Yes. And Randy, thank you. And I'd like to close today with, I know this is a favorite quote of yours from the writer E.E. Cummings, who said, quote, "We do not believe in ourselves until someone reveals that deep inside us something is valuable, worthy of listening to, worthy of our trust, sacred to our trust. Once we believe in ourselves, we can risk curiosity, wonder, and spontaneous delight, or any experience that reveals the human spirit." Could you talk about why that quote speaks to you?
I found that, I can't even tell you how many years ago, and I've had that. I carry that with me, and I've always used that, and even in my company brochures or whatever. To me, it's just, I look back, at one time in my life, I was probably the most insecure, shy individual. And I look back on the things that continue to build that self-confidence and that courage. And I think that's with everybody. We all have some areas that we can, improve that self-esteem, that confidence. But part of that is people believing in you. And God has me on this earth. Believe me, there's been, if you kind of knew my history, it makes me wonder why I'm still here, everything I've kind of chose to do. But so much that had people believing in me and hearing me and listening to me and giving me the opportunities to continue to grow. And I just love that. To me, that is understanding somebody and finding what their needs are and believing and them believing in you and continuing to go forth. But you got to have the chance to do that. And that's one of the things I like to think that I've done over the years is give people the opportunities, give people the chance to believe in other people and certainly believe in themselves.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us today. Today on Unrestrained, my guest has been Randy Frost. He is the program director at the Paul Anderson Youth Home at the Juvenile Justice Facility in Vidalia, Georgia. Thank you so much, Randy.
You're very welcome.
And thank you all for listening. Thank you for joining us today on Unrestrained. Tune in again soon for another interview with an expert in behavior management. Until then, this is your host, Terry Vittone, hoping your intention is prevention.